for describing the fact that actually the genocidal tendencies started even before the birth of the independence of the US. And you have the concept of terra nullius, which, this slogan that Israel embraced of a land without a people and a people without a land did not come from nowhere. It came from, Welcome back, everybody. This is the Black Elephant Experience in collaboration with Neutrality Studies. And today it's my great pleasure to welcome Pascal Lottaz, who's Associate Professor of International Relations at Kyoto University and the host of Neutrality Studies. Welcome, Pascal.
Thank you for having me, Felix.
I'm particularly thrilled, I have to say, to have you, Pascal, because I don't think I would be doing this right now. I wouldn't be having this conversation on my own channel in collaboration with yours if it weren't for your work, if it weren't for your channel, and if it weren't for your journey. Because I remember watching you a couple years ago and thinking, as I kept watching Neutrality Studies, seeing how I could see you evolve in your Weltanschauung, to use a precious German word, and I felt a lot of kinship with your journey, because I felt we were in a way sort of exploring the limits of what we thought our culture was, the culture that we came out of, Western European culture, and sort of realizing almost at the same time, or not far from one another, of exactly how wrong we were about that culture, and sort of adopting slowly but surely a different worldview. So anyway, it's really a pleasure. And this conversation today will be an opportunity. I think many of your viewers are, you tend to be self-effacing. You don't talk a lot about yourself. You are mild-mannered, as we say in the US, and people don't really know what's going on in the background for Pascal Lottaz, and I thought we could have a bit of a meta conversation. We could have a bit of a meta conversation about your journey and sort of how it relates to all the questions I just mentioned, and not just about the unraveling of Western-led or US-led Western hegemony, and also the sort of this looming, incredibly scary global economic crisis that seems to be on the way. But maybe let's dive in with something very current and urgent. I'd love to hear your take on what has been going on in Western Asia. And I mean, so my first question will be very straightforward. Was the MOU signed in Versailles actually a memorandum of misunderstanding?
It's a wonderful way of putting it, but no.
It's not my expression, it's Chas Freeman's.
Well, I view the MOU from the side of Iran as a way to assert dominance, which is usually not a good thing when you do real diplomacy, because there what you need is solutions, not dominance. But from their side, it's definitely a way to put down your foot and show that you can force the other side to sign something which they absolutely despise, right? That's why a lot of us in the commentariat actually call it a declaration of surrender, and that Donald Trump signed that thing in Versailles made it just all the sweeter. But that's that. On the other side, for the Americans, I think it's just it's a piece of paper which has the potential of relaxing a couple of these pain points, especially the Strait of Hormuz, the economic situation, which is really getting to Trump's head, right? I mean, probably mouth already underwater, and he can feel the water is still rising. But I don't have I don't have any illusions that they will break this as soon as they want. I mean, they don't attach any kind of inherent feeling to this. There's no kind of, oh, we have to live up to this now, we committed to this now. No, this is, I mean, they were willing to explicitly and without blinking breaking the UN Charter. There's no reason that they shouldn't just break that agreement immediately. And you can see how they're already doing that, how they immediately went behind Iran's back, trying to make some form of agreement with the Lebanese government that is trying to undermine what Article 1 says, which is basically one of the most important things of the MOU. So there is no good faith, if we want to use this lawyer's terminology. And this MOU is at best just that, kind of a memorandum of understanding. It's not an agreement. It's not a treaty. It's not anything that will ever be ratified. It is at best a roadmap. But we can see very clearly that both sides basically had other motives and reasons to propose that. But then again, it is a potential way forward, at least, and both sides at some point would like to probably stop the kinetic phase of this warfare. But then again, the United States definitely has the idea that it can still break Iran. You know, the US approaches, if it doesn't work the first, second, or third, or fifth time, then maybe it's going to work the 20th or the 30th or the 35th or the 50th time, right? The US has time. The US has time, and it got the experience in the past that if you just plow on, eventually you will get what you want, because all you need is for your enemy to break once. Once is enough. You only need one 1991 and the Soviet Union is gone. The Soviet Union ain't going to come back. So one 1991 is enough. It's just the question is, when are you going to get it, right? And the United States has been doing that for its entire existence, the 250 years and before, actually. If you look at the way that the white settler immigrants in North America dealt with the problem, the pesky little problem that there were people before, right? You go, you kill, you have a war, you come to a standstill, you make an agreement, you break the agreement, you kill, you make come to a standstill, you make an agreement, you break the agreement, standstill, make an agreement, until you have the entire continent, and then you expand to Hawaii, then you go all the way to the Philippines, and you keep making agreements, and whenever it suits you, you break them. So this is a very old pattern, and it's a European pattern, not just a US pattern. And that's where we circle back to what you said at the beginning, this disillusionment with waking up one morning and realizing, once you look at all the pieces in front of you of that puzzle, and you realize, oh goddamn, we're the baddies. We are the genociders. We're the people who have been eradicating all the others. We're the reason why North America is white and black and not, red, and why the Aborigines are suddenly all gone from Australia. I mean, we're the reason. We're the genociders, and we've genocided many, many people, not just a couple of individuals. And so what we are seeing also at the moment in Palestine, the genocide in Gaza and on the Palestinians in general, it's just one more form of something we've been doing for a long time. And sometimes we are very proud of it. Like, when Winston Churchill causes the Bengal famine, then it was done in the name of the Lord and in order to defeat Hitler. When Hitler does it, of course, it's Hitler, and then it's bad. It's always bad. But the way that we deal with genocide is and with the crimes of the West is just outrageous. And that was my big disillusionment. I mean, back in 2022, when I started my channel, I seriously still had this question: why did neutrality for Ukraine fail? I couldn't make sense of it, because it was the most obvious way of de-escalating the situation and getting to peace, right? And I asked Dimitri Trenin about it and asked to speak to him twice. And he at one point told me, look, Pascal, I think at this point it is up to you guys to figure out what happened. And Trenin was right. It was just, I mean, it was obvious to the Russians. It's obvious to a good part of the global South, and it's totally not obvious to people like us who believe in these fairy tales of luckily always us on the good side of history winning. Luckily, First World War, Second World War, and the wars before, luckily it's always the good side. Luckily America won the war, its own wars, right? And because it stands up for freedom and liberty and dignity and whatnot. Bullshit. It's so much bullshit, and I'm sorry, it's even within the first 10 minutes of the video, but I am at the point where I think we shouldn't mince words anymore, even if we have an academic discussion. It's some people still call it a tragedy. It's not a tragedy, it's just crime, just horrendous crimes time and time again, and we're the ones implementing them, largely. There's others who implement crimes as well. We are not the only ones, but we are the ones with the largest bag of guilt, I would argue, over the last 500 years, settler colonialism that has eradicated so many people from the face of the earth, and we're not even aware about them.
It's there's so much there, and I really empathize with this realization that you describe, and the sort of basically the realization that fundamentally there's something genocidal about our culture. Just that thought that is actually the reality of the past 500 years, and that in a way, I'm always reminded, as I was listening to you, I was thinking about Louis Ferdinand Céline and how he said, darkness has been around for a very long time. What makes it unbearable, at least to me, is the bullshit. It's and he says this at the beginning of the 20th century, dealing with World War I and sort of the aftermath of it.
I mean, look at it. I mean, it's disgusting. We're in 2026, and some people still pretend the Gaza genocide is about the right to self-defense for poor little Israel, that never ever could do anything bad. The most moral army in the world. I mean, the euphemisms are so grotesque that it will be very difficult in the future for historians to teach this in front of a class of students and kind of make them understand what this looked like. I mean, it's going to be so obvious that they are going to question their professors when they tell them, look, this is really what people actually thought at the time. It
reminds me of yeah, when you look at, what you said about North America, and thank you for describing the fact that actually the genocidal tendencies started even before the birth of the independence of the US. And, you have the concept of terra nullius, which, this slogan that Israel embraced of a land without a people and a people without a land did not come from nowhere. It came from Britain with Australia and Britain with America. And it's not by chance that America is so supportive of Israel. It's because it's sort of like it sees itself, and America's like, job done.
Yeah, no, I'm going further. I'm not only saying it sees itself, it is itself. There's this very big debate actually in our corner of the internet. Who's wagging who, the dog the tail or the tail the dog, right? And then you have people who say like, Israel runs the United States, and you have others who say like, no, you idiots, it's obviously the United States who's using Israel in order to implement its hegemonic design in West Asia. But in my view, both of these kind of things, they miss the point. It's one single system. It's one single body politic with different organs. The United States is one, Israel is one, Europe is another one, probably somewhere down there near the exit. But they are part of the same body cultural, or I don't know how to describe it, but this kind of spreading thing. That works together. And you see how they work hand in glove.
Metastasizing superorganism.
It's an organism. It's an organism that cooperates and collaborates, and it has different tiers and different ways in which it interacts. But at the end of the day, it does belong together, because the one way what works and what not is if you look at the things that are outside of the organism. We know that Palestine is outside the organism because that one's being eaten up, it's being devoured. We know that Jordan and even Saudi Arabia and so on are outside because they're not part of the intricate players, right? We know that even the Japanese and others are outside because the discourse is different. And it feels different. And of course, you have the language of diplomacy and whatnot that keeps it together. But if we look at the hard imperial core, Israel, Europe, and North America, they go together. The whites go together. Yes, they have imported blacks and they've imported others. Yes, but that part of the globe plays this game of using any tool under the sun, including genocide, in order to get what they want. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The hope with Palestine is, of course, that this time is one of the moments when it doesn't. But we see how close they are of getting to this goal of like colonizing another part of the globe, one that they've been looking at for the longest time. Because and I've had people on my channel who made that argument. This is just the latest version of a crusade, like literal a crusade, as in occupy the Holy Land and then turn it into a habitable ground for the good race, right? The Jews and the Christians, the Judeo-Christian tradition. Also another bullshit term. Judeo-Christian exists. That idea exists for something like 80 years. Nobody older than nobody 100 years and before would have ever talked about Judeo-Christian blah 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 blah. It's completely made up nonsense concept in order to justify Zionist views.
There's a wonderful movie by Elia Kazan. I think it's called Gentleman's Agreement, and it happens in New York in, I think, the late 40s. And it's I think Gregory Peck, if I'm not mistaken, plays a journalist who pretends to be Jewish to see the level of anti-Semitism in New York in the late 40s. Right. It's basically like outrageous. He gets excluded everywhere. He can't do anything. So the idea that, there was this thing that's been around forever of Judeo-Christian values as opposed to Abrahamic values, which of course include Islam, is just a fantasy. And it's a fantasy, that you can see was invented because the Europeans suddenly realized that after 500 years plus of pogroms against Jews in Europe, they had let 6 million of them be genocided by the Nazis. And so they had to find a way of saying, no, actually, we're part of the same white club. It's particularly horrendous. What you said about the superorganism, and I completely share your view, although I tend to think that the US empire is guiding, like I see Israel more like a pit bull, the angry arm of the US empire. But I agree with the idea that it's the same organism, certainly.
Yeah, the only reason why I think the organs is a better way to think about it is because who calls the shot, the brain or the heart? If you switch off the brain, what does the heart do? And if you switch off the heart, what does the brain do? It's like they obviously work in tandem and influence each other. They are part of the same kind of group. And sometimes something that Israel does is not in the interest of the US and vice versa, but they still do it together. But at the end of the day, they push in the same direction. That's the thing.
Absolutely.
and you plow on.
Yeah. And I think like this is actually, it brings us to a point that I think has been, hypermnesia around the genocide of the Jews during World War II, which tends to exclude the other peoples who were genocided as well, the Roma, the Slavs, the Russians in particular, has led
the Chinese.
to, of course, sorry, thank you, has led to amnesia regarding so many other genocides, right? Yeah. It's not just the Palestinians, it's the Congolese right now, 15 million or so Congolese people have been killed over the last decades without a peep in Western media.
Yeah, but
sorry.
This is the modus operandi of the West. selectiveness. The trick is to select and say like, okay, this is a bad genocide, therefore we're going to look at it and we're going to write like all of these books and movies and everything about it, and have Steven Spielberg work on it and whatnot, because it's a really bad genocide. But then you have the good genocides, right? The ones that kind of push forward the whole concept. I mean, who talks about the genocide against the North Americans still? I mean, who still looks at what the North Americans actually do today? I looked up the Navarro tribe the other day, and the Apaches. You know what they are struggling with? The couple of 100,000, 1 million or so survivors that we have. You know what they struggle with? Running water to their houses. That's what they write on their 1995 type of homepages, that they say like, oh, we hooked up another 150 housing units to running water in 2026.
Yeah.
So that's just there, but that's done, right? So therefore, no need to talk about it. Again, Bengal and I mean, what the US did to the Vietnamese, what the US did to Indonesia, what the US did to Latin America, what Europe and in extension Europe also did. Again, like right now, the Europeans, all of them collectively decide that 27 million dead Soviet citizens is nothing that's worth remembering. And they actively suppress the remembrance of that. They try to shift the entire Second World War discourse to one where United States came to rescue Europe. Period. The Germans are not even willing anymore to admit in official statements that it was the Soviets who liberated Berlin. I mean, that part of memory is like now being actively suppressed. People who lay down flowers in Berlin at the Soviet the monument that they have, some of them get arrested and stuff like that. I mean, we live in this kind of world where ideology and this idea of us having these superior values, which we always had, right, for the last thousands of years, right? We were always the good ones, so our values always won, and now they're the best ones again. And it goes so far that you now actively undo something that was unthinkable even 20 years ago. But then again, those moments 20 years ago were those when we still had, and I'm going to add here a new beautiful German word, Deutungshoheit, sovereignty of interpretation. Our interpretation of the world is what got shoved down the throats of everybody else. And because the system is now changing, because we are now in a multipolar world, that is not going down anymore. And instead of trying to sell it better, or to kind of adjust and actually do some introspection, the Europeans never do introspection. Never. They only do it when they lose a war. And right now we haven't lost a war yet, therefore zero introspection. And we will plow on and try to stuff our narrative down everybody else's throat, which is why they're getting so angry and mad with anybody who isn't sharing into their portrayal of the world.
Can you repeat that German word? I'm a bad Austrian. I didn't know it.
It's called Deutungshoheit.
Yeah.
Deutung is interpretation, and Hoheit is sovereignty, or
we can link it very tightly to the concept developed by a wonderful Brazilian scholar whose name I'm forgetting right now, who invented the term epistemicide, which is something that we've been in the business of forever. When you mention this superorganism, because I think this is something I want to sort of latch on to, because I think it's a very important part of this conversation. Something that has happened, one of the few things that I have seen that has given me hope in the past few years, is the fact that suddenly you have in America a divorce among the right on Israel, and you have a lot of people who are basically no longer worried about being called anti-Semites. And they're just saying, you know what, they almost wear it as a badge of pride, because they can see that this term has been so instrumentalized that it no longer carries any power. And I think one of the things that we have to be really sort of look at more closely when you look at the relationship between Israel in the West, and in particular the relationship between Israel and the US, is the fact that this is not just what we're dealing with, obviously. It's not just an Israel problem. It is a Western problem. And it is also a Jewish diaspora problem. The state of Israel would not be in the place that it is. It would not be able to do what it does if it did not have massive support among especially boomers now, but the rich Jewish Americans and rich Jewish people everywhere, and even maybe not so rich. But there is a sense that sort of, this is a real problem that you have in the US. There is no American Jewish billionaire that does not support Israel unconditionally. And this is an issue. And this is an issue that most people until now weren't willing to look at because of fears of being called anti-Semites.
The interesting thing is, of course, that you have a relatively large Jewish community that does not only not support Israel, but that actively opposes it, right? Especially in New York. So you have very faithful Jewish people, even wearing the all of the regalia and whatnot, and they go like, not in my name. We are not doing this, and we are against this, and we support the right of the Palestinians to live on their own land and to return to their own land. It isn't right that a Jew from New York, born in New York and brought up in New York, can at any point in time go to Israel and claim the land, and then people who were there for hundreds of years and were then chased away in the Nakba or more recently, they cannot. I mean, we have a lot of Jews who actually oppose this, and we have luckily also a lot of very, very prominent Jewish thinkers who oppose this. Jeffrey Sachs, first and foremost, John Mearsheimer, another one, Yaakov Rapkin, whom I had on my channel several times. I mean, with great minds and brains who actually also work on digging into and deconstructing this weaponized anti-Semitism. And that's not to say that all anti-Semitism discourse is weaponized and is BS. There is real anti-Semitism, just as there is real Russophobia and there's real racism against blacks, there's real racism against Asians. We have all of that going on, but you're absolutely right. Anti-Semitism was, of course, weaponized and in the end used against anyone who said something slightly critical of Israel. And that's now, of course, in turn, destroying the entire argument, which is something that a lot of us actually predicted that it would do, and it's doing it. And the problematic part then is that once the pendulum swings the other way around, it might go way too far, and we will actually have to actively defend Jeffrey Sachs, John Mearsheimer, Yaakov Rapkin against real anti-Semitic attacks just based upon their religion, and that have nothing to do anymore with the with what the criticism actually should be about, which is about Zionism. And which is why, I mean, and I said that on my podcast too, we need to also realize not only the mortal damage Zionism has done to the Palestinians, we also and the Arabs in that part of the world in general. We also need to recognize the damage it did, and to some extent even mortal damage maybe, to the Jews, because it actually eradicates Jewishness out of the Jews, and that's even one of their goals. They said so from the beginning. They don't want the weak, feeble, like Torah-abiding biblical Jew. They want the muscle Jew. They want a different kind of Jew. They want a Jew that has nothing to do anymore with Judaism. So they want to rebreed the entire religion, right? And that in that sense, the faithful Jewish part that are actually peaceful and loving and so on, they are also victims, not directly as not kinetically and physically to the most part as the Palestinians are. There are differences, but that to me, we should include that in the crimes of Zionism against humanity.
Of course, there's no producer of anti-Semitism in the world that comes anywhere near Israel in terms of level of production, like industrial production of anti-Semitism. Like I'll always remember the answer of Norm Finkelstein, who's asked by a student why he supports the Houthis. They have death to the Jews on their flag. And he says, well, you know, it reminds me of my mom. My mom survived the Holocaust, and my mom always had a problem with Germans her whole life. And I couldn't do and I ended up being quite indulgent with my mother. And I think if you're a Yemenite and you've seen your whole life people with a flag with the Star of David killing people, your brothers and sisters, from a very neighbor, like a close neighboring land, you would also tend to, group them together. That's what happens.
Yeah. But this is why our main task has to be to make clear to everybody that these are not the same groups. They're two different groups. And actually the biggest trick that the Zionists are trying to pull off is to make everybody believe that they are the Jews, right? They are not the Jews. They are the Zionists. They are the proponents of a political ideology, which is utterly completely different from people who adhere to a religious creed and faith. Completely different groups, and we need to separate them.
But I think like what makes things very complex is, on the one hand, I as someone who has many anti-Zionist friends in the U.S. as an American citizen, I can say without hesitating 1 second, 99% of them are Jewish. I mean, it's not like
there's one thing, and I mean, we have the estimates are that there is somewhere in the ballpark of 40 to 50 million Christian Zionists out there in the United States, all of the evangelicals, and you're the current Minister of Defense / Minister of War, Pete Hegseth, is one of them. There's a lot of them. I mean, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is one of them, and you have millions of them, literally Christians, evangelicals, who will support Israel come what may, because they want Israel as the state of Israel. The Jewish state must exist because it must raise Al-Aqsa and then build the third temple so that Messiah can come back and actually eradicate the Jews, and then we can all go to heaven. I mean, it's a very twisted and sick worldview, but there's a lot of them, and they are just as much part of the Zionists project as the Jewish Zionists. There's more of them than of the Jewish Zionists. So in a sense, if we equate Judaism with Zionism, we are actually letting off the hook about 50 million people who are co-responsible for this.
But as I learned, thanks to you in one of your interviews of a wonderful Portuguese scholar, like Zionism was actually first a Christian project.
Manuel Ramos. Yeah. It was a Christian project. It was stuffed down the throats of the Jews, right? And it was sold to them, and then they started picking about only about 120, 140 years ago. And it started in evangelical the UK. It started there.
Yeah, exactly, in the UK. So it was upper class Brits and aristocrats who called themselves the first Zionists. I mean, it's quite extraordinary to look at this and acknowledge this.
And that's why these Zionists were also inherently anti-Semitic, of course, because they wanted to get rid of the Jews. That's why Zionism and Nazism are actually not incompatible. And Yakov Rapkin, in one of his books, he shows this little coin, a medal that was coined to commemorate how in 1932 or 33 there was a Nazi functionary who went actually to Palestine and was shown around by a Jewish Zionist, and they coined this medal, and on the one side the swastika, and on the other side the Star of David, saying like and around it the words like a Nazi goes to Palestine, because he went on a study tour, because this was a model, right? Okay, what could we do with our Jews? We could just pack them all into Palestine. That would be a solution, right? And that's the sick part of this entire story, that this ideology at the moment that is around Zionism is actually extremely European. I don't want to call it. It's not fascistic, but it is completely inhuman in the way that it ethno-national. It's ethno-nationalism, right? And in this case, it's exported ethno-nationalism. And of course, different people have different reasons to actually want that. And if you were a Jew who went through the Holocaust, or the child of somebody who went through the Holocaust, then I do understand how this idea of a homeland for the Jews looks extremely appealing, and how the whole argument of the Zionists looks extremely appealing. But as soon as you scratch the surface just a little bit, which is what Norman Finkelstein did, and then immediately figured out what it actually was, which a lot of others actually did, and figured out what Zionism is, which we did and figured out what Zionism is. I mean, once you start scratching, you just see that it is an ethno-nationalist, an exclusionary project that then relies on violence for its very existence, and that can't be the way forward.
No. You called your channel, and some of our viewers today are watching this from your channel, Neutrality Studies. How do you feel about the concept of neutrality? Is there such a thing in 2026 as neutrality in the world that we live in, the world that we are coming to terms with?
Of course, I'm a great a proponent of neutrality. And when people sometimes criticize me and say, but Pascal, your channel is not neutral at all. And then I usually tell them, but look, I never claimed to be neutral. I claim to study neutrality. I've never seen a biologist who's an amoeba. I've never seen a cancer researcher who's himself a cancer. So I'm a neutrality researcher. I'm not neutral. I'm a researcher of neutrality, and I'm actually a proponent of it. I think it is something that can help us as a tool of international relations. And that's where we then have to break it down. And to answer your question, everything depends on what you mean with neutrality. Neutrality is a term that you should think of a little bit like the term sovereignty. Everybody kind of understands it, but if you ask them to define it, what it means and what not, you will immediately get a lot of disagreements. And just like sovereignty, there's no absolute neutrality. There's not a platonic kind of, the sun, and then that's the neutrality, and from there it radiates, and then things are more neutral or less. No, neutrality is actually, to me, it's a description of a relationship. When you, in the most basic terms, and I use that image a lot, it's a triangle. When you have two conflicting parties, and there's a third party that neither joins this side nor this side, but has a relationship with both of them, then that's the neutral position. Then what that party does is a completely different question. Whether we then understand that in the legal sense of international law is a different question. But the basic premise that you have a triangle, that you have three poles, two of them are in conflict and one of them is not, with neither, then that creates this setup. And we find that setup time and time again. We find it in our families, we find it among our friends, we find it among nation states. And that's what I'm studying. So in a sense, you could substitute the word neutrality with third-party actors. That's what I study, and that's what I would defend, that we always find. I mean, even during the world wars, we never had a moment when every single nation was at war with everybody else. Never. We always had third parties, and they always did stuff, and they did stuff differently, and they were usually criticized by both sides. How dare you not be with us because we are defending humanity? How dare you support our enemy? And well, that's what I study. And my claim is that if we understand that position well enough, and if we understand the tools and the possibilities that it offers, this position, and what can be done about it, and how we can build it also upon the international law that we already created, the norms we already created, the kind of myths we already created, then we can maybe use it going forward to stabilize, especially this multipolar world configuration. And have a little bit less violence in the future and a little bit less genocide in the future. So that's my hope, and what kind of inspires me to continue also calling it Neutrality Studies. And on the one hand, have the social media arm where I try to offer geopolitical analysis and so on, but also every once in a while shove a little bit neutrality down the throats of people who otherwise wouldn't watch it. And on the other side, I do the academic thing, and I work on books with colleagues mainly, and we write chapters and we do conferences in order to dig deeper into the theoretical part. but with the goal, or at least my goal, of trying to work towards operationalizing it, because we did have a time, especially in the late 19th, early 20th century, when neutrality was much better understood than today. Let me show you my two of my treasures. Ta-da! Two big fat books, published in 1938 or 39 by Philip Jessup, on a collection of neutrality laws, regulations, and treaties of various countries, by an American, Philip Jessup. Why by an American? Because all the great neutrality scholars were in the United States, because guess what? The US was neutral. not the innocent kind of neutral, not the harmless kind of neutral, but it had a very important neutrality policy. And they had great scholars. And guess what? This book was one of the publications of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. So, there's a lot to unpack. And this book actually used to belong to the Swedish embassy in Washington, D.C., somehow found its way back to Sweden, and somehow found its way to me in Japan. So, we have a long history to work on within the field, and I'm intent and adamant to continue that and build it up, and hopefully inspire others to join. And then we create neutrality studies as part of the curriculum of international relations all around the world.
This is a much more interesting. I have to say, I think I was stuck with the term neutrality because of the term neutral. I feel there's a lot of things that are like, the West has apparently an unextinguishable capacity to project onto the world things.
Yep.
And say, this is neutral, this is objective, this is universal, when it's actually extremely Western. And what you're describing is actually something that was mastered in a way by, I guess in international relations, by no one as well as the non-aligned back in the 20th century, which is something completely different. And as we know, the non-aligned in some ways were a bit closer to one side than they were to the other. They weren't trying to be completely, what I like about what you're describing is that there's a huge difference between that and two-sidism.
No, it's literally, not literally, sorry. I would argue it's the opposite, because I think the word actually captures it quite well. It's made of, it's a Greek term, of course, ne and uter. Actually, also the root of the English language, neither, right? Ne uter, neither of the two, neither of two sides. And if you're neither of two sides, then you know what you are. You're your own thing. You're your third side. You're what you are, and that's also what the non-aligned did. That's what India and so on are doing at the moment. They're actually trying to make it clear. Look, we just do what's good for us. We're being ourselves. India is India, and India does what's good for India. And in some part, it's good to deal with the Russians and oil trade and whatnot, and have a good and cordial relationship with them. On the other hand, we also don't want to have a bad relationship with the Americans. So we cooperate there, and we cooperate where it makes sense. But we will not pick sides in this proxy war between NATO and Ukraine. Things like that. You take your own position. That's why. Again, I think understanding it in a relational way makes the most sense. Also, one more observation is that, of course, that meaning of neutrality is something that a lot of Western ideologues hate. They hate it, especially the neocons, because if you're neutral, then you're also not on our side, right? You're also not willing to be dominated by us. Jeffrey Sachs makes that point the whole time. The neocons are all about domination. Anyone who's not submitting is being treated as an enemy. And the neutrals, they don't submit, So they're maybe not a first-degree enemy, but there's definitely a second-degree enemy. And it is no coincidence, I would argue, that the crackdown on the Second World War neutrals, the big crackdown, the ideological crackdown, came after 1990, when the Cold War ended. Then suddenly the gold in Swiss bank accounts became a thing, and the Swedes and so on. There was a lot of house cleaning that had been in the waiting for a while, but that all of these things actually also came from from the US, which said, like, look, in the Second World War, there was not just the Nazis that did crimes, there were the neutrals, they also did crimes. And that's not to say that no crimes happened, they did. But, you know, in a sense, in a way that you as a narrative want not only to win against the other side, you also want to win against those who didn't pick your side. That's also inherent in the system, right? So,
of course.
That's the kind of dynamic we are looking at.
You mentioned India. I couldn't agree more, although I wish they were able to apply that neutrality internally, because, as you know, the Modi government is not being very neutral towards Muslims within India. But you also mentioned Sweden, and I think this is a really interesting example of a country that has completely lost itself in recent history. For many years, the books that you own show that there was a keen interest in Sweden in being one of the incarnations in the West of neutrality.
Yeah.
And they have forsaken that very self-destructive way recently. And you can see that this is part of a new definition of Europe within the context of the great vassalization project that the EU, I thought, was becoming, and I'm finding out was always sort of the point of the EU now. You mentioned in the opening, at the beginning of our conversation, this appalling agreement that was signed by Israel and Lebanon just days ago. And as you probably saw, I'm sure, Ursula von der Leyen went out of her way to celebrate this agreement. Are we, where will the disintegration of European credibility and legitimacy stop? I mean, where will it end? We since World War II, this continent has no longer been a superpower in military terms. It has no longer been really a superpower in economic terms, or rather it's crumbling economically at a speed that most people don't even understand. Like, we are the size of the European economy, and with regards to the rest of the global economy, we're shrinking faster than the Xi dynasty of China in the 19th century. That's very fast, or was it 18th century? Don't quote me, but basically we're shrinking very fast. But we had this thing, thanks to our amazing propaganda, we had this thing that we were a moral superpower somehow.
Yeah.
And now, the emperor, since October 7 at least, that has completely disappeared.
Yeah. So for as much as I wish that they did something different, I mean, the most positive thing, and I'm a morbid optimist, because I cling on to whatever shred of hope there is until it's long gone. The best thing I can say is that she's kind of maybe they're in a sick way doing Europe a favor, because they're becoming a caricature and a comic out of themselves, right? And they're making it so with every year that passes, they latch on and cling on more and more to something that 25 years ago, a good part of the globe would still have said, yeah, that's your ideal. And by now we know, no, it's not. It's not. I mean, you're obviously doing the opposite. You're preaching human rights, and you're actively defending and helping. Not only defending, you're helping to exterminate people in Gaza. You're sending the weapons, and you're doing the policy and whatnot around the genocide on the Palestinians. And while screaming human rights from the top of your lungs, you are going after journalists and after independent analysts, Jacques Beau, Nathalie Yamb, Hussein Dogru, with the most outlandish kind of non-legal measures, because sanctions are not a legal measure. Sanctions are a policy measure. You're going after people and destroying their lives for journalism while celebrating Journalist Day, how the EU defends journalists around the world. You rig elections and you undermine elections, and you in Romania or where not, you have elections repeated, and then you write at the building of the commission in huge letters, democracy, and you celebrate Democracy Day. I mean, I'm just waiting for the moment when Ursula or Kaya or one of these kleptocrats actually stands in front of the camera and says, democracy, c'est moi. I'm the democracy. My will is the expression of democracy. Therefore, if you oppose me, you oppose democracy. They're just one step away from that, one single step. And I'm sure within the next 5 years, one of them is in one or the other way gonna make a comment like that, because that's where their entire mentality is going. But and in this sixth sense, maybe it's gonna help us in 20 years from now, once this mass formation or this mass psychosis that has gripped the continent, once that starts ebbing and flowing away, you know, once we get into the Khrushchev era and are able to look back at our Stalinist era, in which we're currently in, once that happens, maybe then we can start, you know, do a little bit of introspection. Maybe we will get all of the way to a European Gorbachev, somebody who does deep introspection and then deep analysis and then actually deep policy changes in order to get into a future where you can be prosperous again. I doubt it, because the Europeans are also the absolute masters in self-deception and whatnot. But, you know, again, morbid optimism. Maybe maybe these caricatures of human beings and politicians that we have at the moment will help us to get there in the future. But it's definitely a long-term thing and not a short-term thing. I wouldn't be surprised if in, you know, in the 23rd century, people will look back and will say, like, look, around the 2020, that's around where the century of humiliation started for the Europeans. And they had it coming, for instance.
Yeah.
That wouldn't surprise me very much, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I read when I was in college, you know, the Eric Hobsbawm's books, The Age of Extremes, The Age of Nationalism, The Age of etc. And I think The Age of Humiliation for Europe is a great title for what has started.
I think we need it, actually. And
Yeah,
you know, you're
yeah.
kind of an expert on addiction and getting out of stuff and working on yourself. I mean, at some point we need the humiliation in order to properly find our space in the world, because we still think we're king of the effing hill.
Yeah.
We never were. We were and when we were horrible to everybody else. And the best chance we have, the best hope we can have, is that the others don't want to do to us what we did to them. But we definitely need to get off that hill somehow.
Yeah. No, it's so true. And I find one of the rhetorical tools that I'm hearing more and more coming from people who don't want to do this work is saying basically, yes, we were horrible for 500 years, but it's sort of in the past. Now we're not. Somehow.
Yeah, and look at it, we brought enlightenment and human rights.
Exactly, but it's also something, but it's also sort of, yes, we were, but basically anyone who would have been king of the hill would have done exactly the same as us.
Yes. And may I just add one thing? This is my main criticism on Western international relations realism. Realism, the school of realism, is built around the idea that anybody would act as we do in the same position. The Chinese would, the Russians would, and then they usually go and break it down to, oh, it's just human nature. Look at how tribes fight against each other, or the male, right? Therefore, everybody must be violent. But no, look, what you've analyzed the last 500 years of world history is actually just European colonial history, for a start. And you just look at how the Europeans are fighting each other. And then you kind of extrapolate that, oh, but the others did so too, because the Vietnamese had a war with the Mongols and whatnot, right? Or the Mongols with the Vietnamese, they were the ones who came. Yeah, all of that is true. But then you generalize it and say, therefore, it's better we were king of the hill and we are standing here tall and straight, and therefore we're going to continue and plow on. My greatest criticism on realism, which is otherwise is to me the most important school of thought in order to kind of make sense and analyze the world. So, but that one, that's where I would even argue with Mearsheimer that he's overestimating or underestimating the impact of our own Western European colonial heritage on the entire profession of IR.
That's where I think epistemicide comes into play, because basically we act as if, well, look, I mean, there's no real other game in town, and but that's because we've obliterated the other games in town.
Yeah, we did. So I mean,
yeah,
it's not that it's not as successful in the sense of obliterating the others. If that's the name of the game, then the approach is actually quite successful. But I had this thought the other day. What if the people who actually figured it out? What if the people who had reached the highest level of enlightenment? What if that was the Aborigines? They reached it all. They complete utter like freedom and all figured out, and therefore inherently extremely natural and peaceful. And then come these brutes and they kill them all, but they don't even resist because they've already reached it. I mean, I'm making it up. I'm obviously making it up, but it's just
well, that's
experiment to say, like, and then they would be gone. The people who had figured it out would be gone because they were not violent, and the people who didn't are violent. Therefore, we are now populated by a bunch of people who don't get it.
I have an Aboriginal friend that I'm going to send your way named Tyson Yunkaporta. He wrote an amazing book called Sand Talk, and it's exactly about that. It's like, hey, I remember I was writing this book called The New Nomads, and I kept talking about, well, this happened 7,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago. And I was sort of in my moment of like doing crappy Harari. It was my crappy Harari moment. And he said to me, he turned to me and was like, bro, like, we've been here nonstop for 40,000 years. Like, can you just chill? Can you just sort of take a step back and take that in? And it did me so much good. It did me so much good.
It's kind of fascinating how all our epistemic ways of understanding the world and all of our narratives are very, very, very young. Very young. Yeah. I mean, like, the United States celebrating 250 years. It's like, oh, it's a long time. No, it's nothing, right? It's like fart of a fly in the face of like something like 40,000 years. It's ridiculous in the face of something like 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years of the Persians, of the Egyptians, of the Chinese, right? And so we have, but really, we conceptualize ourselves in very short time frames, with which I think berefs us of a lot of alternative ways of understanding and conceptualizing our place in the world with others. And that's maybe where we're going back to your initial introduction of the Weltanschauung.
Yeah, no, it's very striking to see how caught up in our own bullshit we are, and how much this leads us to look at minute amounts of time and saying, well, this is the rule. The one of the most interesting books I've read about how what we project onto humanity is so often just Western parochialisms, and quite pathetic ones, is David Graeber's last book before he died, where he sort of pulled it apart, tore it apart. It's a really wonderful book. I really highly.
Which one? Bullshit Jobs or
no, the last one. After both of those, he looked at he looked at the myth of the savage. I can't remember the exact title, unfortunately. I'll put it in the description. But anyway, look up the last book of David Graeber, which he did not author on his own. Is really all about pulling all this apart, like tearing all of this apart, and showing that there are many civilizations that and the primitive man was not this sort of power hungry, and even that the first states were not what Harari, who's not the court historian of the House of Davos by chance, tried to sell very successfully. Actually, he didn't just try, he sold very successfully to global elites that were so happy to take this in as the proof of the fact that they were at the top of the human pyramid, not by chance, but because this is what the direction of everything was for so many years since we were sapiens.
I get these allergic reactions these days when I hear these kind of self-serving narratives. Anything that explains why the current moment is the best and is good and is right and is just must make you think maybe the person who wrote that kind of wants to justify why
Yeah, I think
why he and or she in that environment is currently fine. But then again, I mean it's there's an end to the criticism you can do, but and people like Steven Pinker do have a point when they call out, look, we've never been so many, we are 8 billion people on the planet. That's also true. But then saying that's because we were overall a good species and overall enlightenment and so on brought us prosperity and therefore it was worth it, that would go very much too short, right? And we shouldn't. I mean, we should learn from these inhumane moments of the past, and we should strive to not repeat them, but repeat we do.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be as indulgent as you are with people like Steven Pinker or in Sweden, Hans Rosling. I think it's not by chance that global oligarchs and brainwashers of the first order like Bill Gates and Barack Obama embraced the books like Enlightenment Now by Pinker or Factfulness by Hans Rosling. It's because they are not just making an intellectual point. They are making buddies with a self-serving global elite. This is not, it's a discourse that gets you to Davos. And they want to be part, which is the sort of the VIP lounge of humanity, like it or not.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. All I want to say is that it is true that we're 8 billion. It is true that we are at the biggest, right? So, but then the discussion about that and what were the mistakes to getting there, because I still think it's a good thing that we are many. I still think it's a good thing that we have a lot of people around, because I like people. I would love to have them around as much as possible, and everybody has a right to be here. And this is not anything that obvious anymore in times of transhumanism and moving toward a future where AI and robots actually finally eliminate the need of the capitalists to rely on the working class. I wouldn't be surprised if we suddenly got this idea of overpopulation and maybe we need to, go to 4 or 3 billion. And in the name of ecology, right? The planet can't sustain it. Therefore, sorry, 4 or 5 billion over there, but the ship is full and you kind of got to leave.
Already there. It's already there.
So we must instill for our own good the idea that everybody has a place on the planet and everybody gets to stay on that ship, and no Zionist is ever allowed to try to kick them off. And unfortunately, we are not there yet. But that's why it is actually in our own interest to fight all of these kind of traits within our species that try to, self-mutilate the species.
That's a great way to end. It reminded me what you just said of something back in the 2010s. I heard in Sweden someone on the right called the Green Party. They called Greta Thunberg. They called her a watermelon because they said you pretend to be green, but you're saying that basically climate issues are about equality and inequality. And therefore, you're not really green, you're red inside, meaning you're a commie. And indeed, the second Greta Thunberg, who's an extremely precocious, smart young lady, realized that fighting for the climate didn't mean fuck all if you weren't also going to fight for Gaza. The second she made that decision, she was no longer invited to Davos, no longer
they dropped
invited
her like a hot potato.
That was the end. Pascal, there's so much more to say. I'd like to give you the opportunity to say a few last words, but I'm thrilled because this conversation has proven to me that we should have you on very often, and especially where we've been talking with my colleague Alexis Poulain from Le Monde Moderne, a French channel, about having you on, and we're very much looking forward to that. And Do you have a last words?
Happy to do that. And one of the good news is that the alternative media scene is currently booming. New people come on the scene, and they open wonderful channels that are also growing. Yours is one of them. We have Radika Desai, we have Transition Protocols, we have a lot of new things, Larry Johnson, and so on. And you can see how the scene is ripe for more voices of sanity and humanity, and that's not just because people are getting desperate. It's also because the pool of people who want that kind of discourse is growing, and that, again, morbid optimism is something that I think might in the end save us, because we most of us understand intuitively that something's going horribly wrong. So if we do our jobs, and we are to articulate that, and we explain it, and we try to also formulate remedies like a doctor, diagnosis, prognosis, and then treatment, maybe we will get still out of this moment. So yeah, thanks for your work too, Felix.
Thank you so much, Pascal. I just realized I still wanted to talk to you about Ali Abunema, whom you just met at the trial, where he's a plaintiff in Switzerland.
Not the trial, he came to talk about it, but yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for correcting me on that. I was misguided, or rather misinformed, by my own fault. Basically, we will keep that for our next conversation. Thank you so much, Pascal, for coming on, and until soon.